everything shoved down your throat as a big Michael Jordan fan. And again, I have nothing against Michael Jordan. We've talked about how these things sort of turn us against each other. But do you feel that because of what you have to deal with as a Jordan fan, ESPN actually puts you in a position where you constantly feel either defensive or feel like you have to justify your guy, and then ESPN then sort of puts me in a position where I feel like I have to justify my guy. So even though on my first initial text to you, and then it sort of spiraled out of control from both of us, and it's like, wait, how did we, at the end of the night, it's like, how do we get here? We're fighting with each other over text. And no one even mentioned Michael Jordan in that text string. But I think it's what goes on in the background, and it's what ESPN has done to the basketball fans in general, that I think the reason why LeBron is so polarizing, I think I figured it out. I think it's because Michael Jordan owns basketball. He has owned the basketball world and still sells phenomenal shoes, still does a lot in the game of basketball. It's not like Michael Jordan is gone. He is there. He is a presence, and he always will be with his Jumpman brand and everything that he has meant to the game of basketball. In fact, these guys owe their large shoe contracts to Michael Jordan and the way that he, basically invented that whole system. So Jordan is still there. But I feel like the reason that people are so polarized on LeBron is because of what the media has done. And to your point, it's that this constant justification has to go back and forth. So do I think it was LeBron's best performance, and was it as good as the finals? No, I'm totally with you on that. Coming back from down 1-3 against the Warriors, to me, that's still it. This might be second on the list. It was pretty darn good. Like you said, 48 minutes in a game. There's not a lot of NBA stars that could play 48 minutes and put out that kind of production after an 82-game season. But it just irritates me because it's like I am always on the defensive to have to justify LeBron James because, yeah, he's the greatest player of this era, and ESPN is always driving that wedge.
No, absolutely. And yes, it definitely makes it defensive because, like I said, and even in our text thread, looking back at it, neither one of us really mentioned Jordan. And a lot of times it's not that ESPN frankly does a lot, but a lot of their conversation is not just about a game. It seems to be like career validation, season validation, everything. And we got to talking about statistics, and Russell Westbrook came up. And look, you're not the only person that doesn't like some of the things that Russell Westbrook does. There's a lot of guys on ESPN that trash Russell Westbrook. And my point in the conversation was, look, Russell doesn't have the finals and he doesn't have a winning resume, but he hasn't been on the best team since Durant lost. And he plays sort of similar to what LeBron is doing right now with the Cavs in that he does everything. LeBron comes up, he initiates the offense. Everything that they do comes off of LeBron. So if they clear out and they double LeBron, he's going to kick to a shooter. If you go man-on-man coverage with him, he's going to either go to the bucket or go to the post. LeBron's running the entire offense. I think that's why you see where LeBron is gassed like he was in Game 5. But I feel like when Westbrook does it, there's a portion of people, you've talked about it some. It's included that his stats are hollow. He's stat chasing. And my point was, I think some of Russ, these guys all know where their statistics are, but I think some of Russ is just sort of like LeBron out of necessity. Like, I have to do this or we're not going to win. LeBron just has more offensive weapons in his arsenal than Russell has. And I talked about LeBron going to the post, and it wasn't a knock on him. It's a part of his game that a lot of guys don't have. It's what makes him such a difficult matchup. And we'll talk about what I think he's going to do in the finals in segment 2. But if LeBron wants to go to the post, there's no one that can stop him. When LeBron gets his first step around, who wants to stand there and take a charge from LeBron or get posterized? Ask Nurkic how that felt. Doesn't feel very good. So LeBron just has more levels to his game and more that he can go to that Russell doesn't have. So LeBron can get 24 shots. But even looking at some paint points and stuff, about 14 of LeBron's points this regular season came from the paint. That's something that Westbrook's just not getting unless it's transition where he is getting those shots. But a lot of times he's pulling up, he's taking bad shots. LeBron's taking good shots because he's a very high IQ basketball player. He's going to take advantage of double teams, find shooters. He's going to take advantage of mismatches. And that's why, frankly, he shoots the ball at such a high level in terms of percentage-wise. But that becomes part of it too, where sometimes players are seen in one light for one way, and then it's seen as another way with LeBron, where I feel like that's more of the narrative that the media is driving, where it's like, Russ is a ball hog. He's a terrible offensive player. He's just trying to stuff the stat sheet. But LeBron has to do it because he doesn't have anybody else around him. I mean, I'm pretty sure Russell would love to be swapped with LeBron, that he looks out and he goes, hey, it's not Alex Abrinas or Jerome Grant that I'm playing with, or Jeremy Grant, or whoever Grant it is. It's not a very good player. I mean, he would probably foam at the mouth to get a Clarkson and a Nance on his team. His point would be how to utilize them. LeBron just does it better. He's more efficient. They win more. But from a mentality standpoint, I think both of them play sort of the same way. And I got to get it because I can't trust anybody else to do it.
Yeah, and after we had that talk, I got a chance to cool down, and I thought about it a little bit, because what you specifically said to me was accurate. You said, hey, look, you're always ragging on Russ, but he's basically the same kind of player out of the point guard position, running the offense, running triple doubles, and that's basically what LeBron does. So how do you love LeBron and have a problem with Russ? I had some time to think about that, and I realized what it was. It's the same situation that you and I have with Jordan and LeBron, which is this. I actually think Russell Westbrook is fantastic to watch. I think he's a very good basketball player. I would love to have him on the Sixers or on a team that has a chance at a championship to validate his career, because I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's a bad player. In fact, I think he's a great player. I think what makes me kind of against Russ is all the accolades he gets for the things that he does, and the MVP award I felt like he stole from LeBron James 2 years ago, because, it's Russell's turn, that type of thing. Probably the same thing we're going to see with Harden this year. It's Harden's turn. And I think that kind of thing just made me feel against Russ, even though I literally don't have anything against Russ. It's sort of the way that I feel when people start coming at me about Jordan and LeBron. I have to defend LeBron and say bad things about Jordan, even though I really have no problem with Jordan. So it's kind of like that. I think when I cooled down and thought about it, it's that I really don't have a problem with Russ. It's that he's given accolades that people don't give LeBron those same accolades, because it's, Russ had to do it, or he had to drive up all those stats. He had to do, and LeBron, you're third in the MVP voting. But then look what LeBron's done in the postseason versus what Russ has done in the postseason. I feel like there's got to just be at least a little bit of balance there. I guess that's my issue.
Well, there's no balance and that's the problem we talk about with the media. When you're driving a narrative in that you're either pro LeBron or against LeBron. And in order to, make your case for him, sometimes they tear people down. And in order to make their case against him, they build guys up. It really is funny when you step back and look at it, how the media treats certain stories, which it's one of the reasons we started the podcast, because there's so much narrative-driven stuff. And when you have people like ESPN that have their hands in the NBA's pockets, they have their hand in LeBron's pockets. We talked about the venture partnership that they have. I just don't see all the time how they can cover him fairly. And we talked about joking about Brian Windhorst. This is a guy that covered LeBron, from high school, who's found his way on the ESPN as one of their top basketball sort of insiders from simply following LeBron. I told you in text, he's probably hanging out with Bronny Jr. now, being like, hey man, if you make it to the league, I'll cover you and get me to retirement age. But that just seems like how ESPN covers stuff. I just don't think it's fair in the way that it's done. It pits a lot of fans against each other. It gets a lot of clicks, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense from a basketball standpoint. Another thing in this series that made no sense to me that came out, Eric, was the fact that the NBA has a concussion protocol that Kevin Love got put in after Game 6 and really made him miss Game 7 in this series. And you, my brother, and myself were on a text thread. We were talking about it, and I brought it up, and you guys both go, well, don't the NBA have one? And I go, no, I'm talking about the opposite view. I understand why the NFL has one. These guys are banging each other in the head nearly every play. You start talking about if you have one, you're more susceptible to get another one, and it keeps going, and then that's bad. That gets you into the CTE. The NBA, though, in basketball in general, typically you're not getting a lot of headshots. And in fact, the NBA's tried to take those out. You've seen, what happened with DeRozan in this playoff, where he got ejected for even making contact with the head. There's really not a lot, unless it's more of an incidental like the Tatum Love play was, where they just kind of banged heads that no one meant anything from it. But it seems to me that maybe Kevin Love should have had more control to be able to decide if he wanted to miss that game or play in it based on his symptoms and how he felt. And instead, he gets put in a protocol and he automatically has to miss it. it seems to me that the NBA could do something different or a little bit better because it's not the same as the NFL. There's not a concussion lawsuit that's sitting out there. There's not former players that talk about how they have memory loss and all these dementia-type symptoms. I just wanted to get your take on that before we move to the Western Conference and what you think of the NBA protocol for concussions.
Yeah, being that there's not a history of repeated head injuries or head hits in the game of basketball like there would be in football or even soccer with the guys heading the ball, the NBA is really a very incidental contact to the head league, and it doesn't happen very often, let's be honest. So when you have these random things happen, guys bump heads or a shoulder to a head, a guy gets a concussion, I don't know the specifics to Love's situation. I know that part of it probably has to do with his history and what his symptoms or recurring symptoms might be. I'm not a concussion expert by any means. I'm actually very much looking forward to the book that Dale Earnhardt Jr. co-wrote that comes out later this year, because he really is going to dive into what it feels like to have multiple concussions and how that can really wreck your life. And he's not, I don't even think he's coming at it from a CTE perspective. He's just talking about symptomatically. So I don't know what Love felt. I don't know what the doctors see. My only thought, and this is completely theorizing here, my only thought is that the game of basketball is played on a wooden court. So if one of these guys comes out in the following game and the bright lights and the noise and the horn, the buzzers and everything causes one of them to black out or faint and then fall and then slam their head on the court, now you could be talking about a different problem. And so I don't know. I mean, that's completely conjecture. I don't even know if that has anything to do with it. But because football is played where you have a helmet on and you're playing on a grass turf field, if that were to happen and they fall, they're falling on a soft surface. But that's the only thing I can come up with, because outside of that, it really probably should be the player's at least partial decision as to, hey, 2 days later, 3 days later, doc, I feel fine. I got, maybe a little bit of dizziness here and there when I'm, standing still and looking straight up or doing the kind of protocol movements that they have to do. But otherwise, I'm going through my day-to-day activities just fine. Then maybe they should be given the choice to play. I don't know. I don't know what the genesis of the decision is, but you're right. It's a little bit different situation than the NFL because these guys aren't getting repeated head hits. And so is a concussion in the NBA as big of a deal as it is in football? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. And it just got me to think about the differences in them and kind of the NFL stepping their protocol up based on really a lawsuit and historically what they've seen in a lot of studies that have come out. It just feels like the NBA should have more of, like you said, more of the history. Now, Kevin Love is a guy that's had multiple concussions in the past, so I'm sure that factored into it. But also the standpoint, it feels like it should have something to do with if you have two within a certain period of time, if that's 1 week or 1 month or 6 months or whatever it is, then maybe you go into the protocol. But it feels like in these series, it's tough to take guys away. I know the TNT guys got, people are slamming them on Twitter because Shaq said, he would just take an Advil and try to play. Barkley said the same way. That's a lot of guys' mentalities at this point. I mean, we're not talking about game 47 in Memphis or somewhere where, no one really cares. This is game 7. This is the pinnacle of your season to get to the NBA Finals. It just seems like if Kevin Love wanted to play and he passed some of the tests, it shouldn't be a protocol that keeps him out of that moment or takes that control out of his hands. That was just my take on that. Let's move into the Western Conference. Not a lot to talk about here, Eric, because once Chris Paul went out of Game 5 with the hamstring pull, when he just kind of fell on the court, he didn't even get up to move. I think I texted you and my brother about the same time and said that injury looks like it's much more than a 3 or 4 day injury. It looked like a much more significant hamstring injury that he's not going to come back from. Rockets were up 3-2. They dropped 2 in a row. But good God, did they fall apart in Game 7, Eric? They missed 27 three-point shots in a row. I had texted my brother during that game and said, that's got to be some kind of a record. In fact, it is an NBA playoff record for the most consecutive missed three-point shots. 7 of 44 from three-point land for the Rockets. We talked about it a lot, that this Rocket team, the system they play, it's a great system to just dominate in the regular season and really dominate lesser competition. But it just felt like the whole thing fell apart where when the threes weren't working, they didn't have a backup option, Eric, to go to in Game 7. Even with an 11-point halftime lead, they couldn't hold on to it. Is this system going to be something that can win in the NBA, or is it more of a problem that the Warriors create for them?
I don't want to say it's a system that can't win in the NBA because the Warriors have been a phenomenal